Hi, welcome to video 1 of section C. I'm hoping to stick to one video for this one. Although it's a whole section, we've done most of the learning in section A. So if there's anything you don't understand, please go back to that section and look at your notes from there. We're going to follow a process as we have done while we've been doing our spider diagram, and that is fact, extension of the fact, the impact that has, and a practical example. As you will notice on the exam questions, these are predominantly 8 and 10 markers, so we can almost prepare for one of these, I would say. So in this section, we are looking at adaptations, which are changes over a minimum of 8 weeks of training, and that can be aerobic training such as jogging, or that can be anaerobic training such as strength and lifting weights. It means that we're more able to cope with stresses placed on the body. So if we're changing direction at speed, an adapted body will be able to cope with that and have no damage to the bones or the connective tissue, for example. Results in performance at higher intensities for long periods. This means that if we have made adaptations, irrespective of strength, or so anaerobic or aerobic, we will be able to work at higher intensities for long periods. Heavier weights, more repetitions, faster pace for a longer period of time. Maybe not both at the same time, perhaps. So the 2 types of training I've mentioned already. We have aerobic training, which is looking essentially at moderate intensities, and it aids the cardiovascular, heart and the vessels, and and muscular endurance. That's the ability of your muscles or a muscle group to repeat contractions for prolonged periods. The anaerobic training is looking at higher intensities that will predominantly help us with strength, speed and power. So we're looking at games like rugby or netball. In terms of muscular endurance, we're looking at moderate intensities in training. So I think we know this anyway. If we're looking to improve our cardiovascular and muscular endurance, moderate intensity jog. If we're looking at increasing speed and strength and power, very high intensity, short duration. And if we're looking for muscular endurance, it's a longer duration and moderate intensities. So the skeletal system responds to weight-bearing exercise. That's anything where we're putting the weight through our bodies. Walking would be low impact, jogging would be higher impact. The bones become stronger, denser and harder because by this weight-bearing activity we are stimulating the remodelling process. If we can make our bones more dense, we can withstand more impact. So that means landing from a header, doing a depth jump in the gym. We can reduce any fractures or damage to our joints that we may get. We're talking about, with remodelling, talking about fractures actually, not ligaments. That's to do with our collagen. So the remodelling process is osteoclasts being stimulated. They're destroying the old bone. This increased activity activates the osteoblasts, and the osteoblasts will then activate the osteocytes because they're responsible for the sites. We also get increased uptake of the minerals, and again, if you think back to the last section, we talked about having calcium and phosphorus in our diet, particularly after this weight-bearing activity. With exercise, it's going to increase the uptake, so it's like our golden window equivalent, but for minerals. Collagen is a protein and found in ligaments, tendons and cartilage, which are our connective tissues because they connect bones to bones at a joint. The results of exercise, or the impact of exercise, means that we're going to stimulate this collagen synthesis, and we're going to have stronger connective tissues, which means we can withstand more force and we're less prone to injury. Now let's look at a sporting example of that. And I think I mentioned to you before, I'm always thinking about skiing and going over those moguls with your knees, and you can withstand that very fast action. Your cartilage, your ligaments that are attaching the bone to the bone, and the tendon that's attaching your quadriceps, in this case, to the bone, should all come out of that without injury if you have undergone a period of training, and that again is weight bearing training. The muscular strength placed on the body. Right, let's move on to the muscular system. So this is C2. So we're placing regular stress on the muscles, and we can do this with body weight exercises like press-ups or squats, or we can do this with resistance training. So that's any body action with additional weights on you. What we should have is an increased size of the fibres, because we will cause micro tears when we exercise, and they will, of course, if we eat protein and we rest, fix those micro tears. And as they fix, they come back bigger. So we've increased the size of them. This increase in size is called hypertrophy. Increased in size of these muscle fibres mean they're less likely to break at the same intensities that we did before. So in terms of training, we've now overloaded it, so we still create these micro tears. Otherwise, our fitness would plateau in terms of strength. But what it does mean is, because we can withstand more force again, we're going to have increased strength, which means we can apply more force. Now, how is that useful to us in sport? Gosh, in nearly every way. Kicking a ball further, jumping to make an interception, throwing a javelin or a shot put. There's so many ways in which strength is important to us. So we're looking still at the muscular system, and now we're looking at increasing our resting muscle tone. Now, muscle tone is actually a partial contraction of our skeletal muscle, where it remains partly contracted, which means if it's partly contracted, we're already closer to a full contraction. So when we need to, our muscles can contract actually at a faster pace than they did before. This means we get a decreased reaction time. The resting tone also helps our posture. So we're looking at the core muscles, so the abdominals and the erector spinous, the ones in the back, your latissimus dorsi, your gluteal muscles. So all of these around your waist, your chest and your hip area. And this is going to keep us upright and keep us supported when we're bending to pick something up that might be quite heavy. This has a knock-on effect on our balance as well, because if we can control the main heavy part of our body when we're changing direction, for example, in a sport, we're less likely to overbalance. So with effective posture, we're going to reduce the chances of things like backache. We are going to increase our balance and essentially then increase our agility as well, because we've got more control over that heavy part of our body. Hyperplasia means that we are splitting the muscle cells. So our myosin and actin are splitting and almost doubling. So it increases the number of fibres that we have. And if we can increase the number of fibres, of course, we're going to have increased strength and all of those sporting advantages that we get with that, like I mentioned before, with the rebound and the kicking. With muscular training, and this would need to be high intensity, again, strength training, we are going to increase our phosphocreatine stores. Now, what that means for us is when we first start exercise, we're going to have more available, more energy source available to resynthesize more ATP before we have to rely on the other systems. So normally it's 8 to 10 seconds. Now, we may be able to push that a second further, or what we would tend to do is end up trying to do more within that 10 seconds, and it will enable us to do that because that energy system is so quick. So adaptations of fibres. We've got 3 fibres. We've got our type 1, 2As and 2Xs. Now, if you train for endurance, so you're going out on long distance running, or you're doing high intensity interval training actually for sort of 30 minutes at a time, so you're getting your heart and your lungs working consistently for 30 minutes or more, it's going to impact both the slow twitch and the type 2A, those middle ones. It will increase the size and the number of mitochondria that we have in those fibres. Now, if you remember from section A7, we know that Krebs cycle occurs in the mitochondria, and the electron transport chain occurs in the mitochondria. That was the aerobic system, essentially. So glycolysis was in the sarcoplasm of the cell. The rest happens in that mitochondria. If you increase the amount of mitochondria you've got, you can increase the amount of ATP you can resynthesize using the aerobic system. So this is really big for us. Strength training and resistance training impacts the 2A again and the 2X. So we start to see now that this type 2A fibre is quite versatile, and depending on your training you can get it to almost conform to act either like a type 1 or a type 2X. So how does it strength training adapt to these muscle fibres? And it increases the number of muscle cells. So we've increased actin and myosin, those filaments there. And if we can increase the number of muscle cells or muscle fibres, we can say we're going to have more force. So changes in the muscle relating to endurance training. So this is the moderate intensity, longer, prolonged exercise. We're going to get increased amounts of myoglobin. Now myoglobin, if you remember, in the muscle cell, here's our mitochondria. We've got glycolysis going on here in the sarcoplasm. And your myoglobin are here, and they're little storage units for oxygen. Oh, I've made a little face. So the hemoglobin drops off the oxygen and it goes to this myoglobin. Now if you remember again from section A7, you'll remember that myoglobin has a really high affinity for oxygen, so oxygen can travel across. We've got more mitochondria, and now the size is even bigger, so we might have more of them in muscle cells, and they've increased in size. Again, all meaning that we can respire aerobically, because the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain occur in that mitochondria. Increased glycogen stores. Well, we know that we use glycolysis here. It's relatively quick, and we can use that for the lactate system or the aerobic system. We know that burning fats takes an awful lot longer to get into that mitochondria and work through the Krebs cycle. So if we are wanting energy and we're wanting it fairly quickly to perform a high standard or a high intensity, we need to use glycolysis. So if we have more glycogen stores, we can essentially use glycolysis at a faster pace. Now, we are limited to the amount of glycogen you can store, and really by training it's minimal. It does make a difference, but we don't see a great difference in the amount we can actually store. Triglyceride stores, so if we're talking about fat stores in general, actually reduce. Now that reduction will reduce the weight of the person training. If you've reduced the weight of a person training, when they are moving, they're requiring less energy and less force, which means that the muscles don't need to work as hard as they did to get the same results. But we don't do that. Obviously, in sport, what it means for us is if we apply the same force, we're now going to lift up higher. Does that make sense? So it's when it's against our body's weight, it means we will get advantages. The body does also get better at metabolizing triglycerides or metabolizing fat. And that's all down to endurance training, because essentially all endurance training works to increase the amount of oxygen that we can deliver and increase the amount of CO2 we can get rid of, so we can continue working in that aerobic phase for longer, because there's no detrimental effects to it. So by increasing the oxygen that we can get into our bodies, we can metabolise fat stores better as well. Capillarization occurs around the lungs and around the muscle cells, so we get more of these capillaries, which means obviously there's more oxygen that can be transferred across. And if we think about this at the lungs as well, we're going to get a lot more oxygen diffused in and more carbon dioxide and waste product diffused out. And if we can diffuse it out, our acidity levels are not going to rise, which means we can continue without fatiguing. So moving on to the respiratory system, there is an increased strength of respiratory muscles. So we're looking at your intercostal muscles, And actually we are mainly looking at the internal intercostals for expiration, so we can push the air out faster when exercising. This is just when we're exercising. And why the reason we want to push that air out faster is so we can inspire quicker and get more oxygen in. But with every expiration or exhalation, we're going to be getting rid of that carbon dioxide, so it's really important. But we will increase the strength of our intercostals as well as our abdominal muscles for expiration, so they will become more efficient at pushing the air out and reducing the size of the thoracic cavity. We do increase the strength of our external intercostals for inspiration. And as we increase that strength, actually it pulls the lungs, the rib cage, up and out a little bit further, which increases our vital capacity just a tiny bit, but it does make a difference. And if we increase our inspiration capacity, we can take more oxygen in. I have done that. So we expire with more force and at a faster rate, and we can inhale deeper. So lung volumes, I've mentioned vital capacity already. So that was on a spirometer graph, would be the one that looks like this. So it's the amount of air expired after maximal inhalation. So it's like taking a deep breath in, and it's the measurement of you blowing that air out after a deep breath in. That's your vital capacity. And because of that increase in strength in your external intercostals, you can expand your rib cage further and take in more air. So that's your vital capacity. Your tidal volume is the amount you can breathe. So this was this smaller part here on the graph, the amount you breathe in and out normally. Now, because we've increased the strength of our respiratory muscles, we can, during exercise, we can breathe in and out faster because we're more forcibly ejecting the air. Minute volume was VE with a dot, and it means your ventilation over 1 minute, so how much you breathe in and out over 1 minute. So with a period of endurance training, an athlete could improve the amount of air they take into their lungs by 50%. That's huge. And you think how much oxygen that would be available for your body. So it leads to increased oxygens, I've said, increased removal of waste products, I've said. The only other impact is that at rest, now the breathing rate can reduce slightly. It's only about 12 breaths per minute anyway. It may reduce down to 10. And this is because of lots of changes that have happened inside of the body in terms of capillarization and myoglobin and mitochondria, that we don't need to breathe very fast. We're just far more efficient. But it does reduce the amount we breathe at resting rate because of that efficiency. But, and most importantly, when we're exercising, we can have a faster breathing rate because of this forced expiration, and we can have bigger breathing depth because of the better, stronger muscles of our externals, so we can inspire more air each time. I'm going to leave this tutorial here because I think it's quite long already, and I think you should probably have a break before you move on to the next system.